Namaste. Uh, Wish you a very happy 76th India's Republic Day. So, on this great occasion, I thought I'll review a book, a fine book called The Colonial Constitution by Arya Sen Gupta, who's a great scholar. And the topic is that how Indian is India's constitution. As you can see from the title of the book as well, that it's called the Colonial Constitution. And it's very pertinent because the word constitution has become part of the political discourse of the last few weeks and months in India, and also here in United States as the new president has taken over as well. And I've been fascinated with the constitutional debates of India, which is the people who framed the constitution, the what went behind making this constitution, and of some other countries as well. Again, with a caveat that I'm nowhere legal expert or constitutional expert. It's just a book review, what I have tried to understand. So if anything I've misunderstood or misinterpreted, so my apologies. So before I go into this aspect about, why would we say that India's constitution, or are we trying to make an assumption? Why we is there a presumption here that India's constitution is not as much as Indian? I want to kind of talk about a little bit of a side topic, but interrelated. So recently, there was a quote by Nandan Nilekani with respect to artificial intelligence. As every one of us know, that we are in the great AI boom. Large language models are dominating our society, our work life. It's disrupting everywhere. But consider this: that India being an IT superpower, we are, are not dominating the race. Let's be real. Yes, there are great product companies are coming out of India. We great unicorns along the way. We have the best talent, but the services industry in India is now more than 2.5 to 3 decades old. So how did we miss this bus? And after missing this bus, we still kind of claim this again. Nandan Nilekani has his right. He has his view and opinion, and maybe rightly so, that we shouldn't build a language model, which is the heart and core of what generative AI is along the way. So, and this was challenged by an Indian origin CEO, Arvind Srinivas, who runs a great product company called Perplexity. And there's a social media debate going on that. We don't want to go it. But if you see the 9 out of 10 top companies in tech companies along the way in the world, 9 out of 10 are from United States. India could have at least had 3 to 4, and we are all responsible for that, right? Because I'm not blaming that that's certain people, but the original, the innovation is something which we have lost, or we have lost our mojo. We are more followers, and the same thought and the same principle I can see parallel 75 years back, 76 years back, and that's what Arya talks about, that we didn't frame the constitution for India, you know an original, something which was needed for the Indian masses, but picked up elements from different countries, different constitutions along the way, most importantly Britain. And that's why he calls this book the Colonial Constitution. In fact, there's another book that I would recommend. It's a Hindi book by the great journalist Ram Bahadur Rai. It's called Bharatiya Samvidhan Ankahi Kahani, which means the untold stories. And he also frames this debate along. But before we go into that, some trivia. India's constitution is one of the lengthiest constitution. Probably more than, I think, 345, 350 articles. I think today with all the amendments and all, I don't know if it's 445 or 449, I don't know. So it's pretty lengthy, around 145,000 words. Consider the US Constitution is 4,553 words and just 7 articles. That's it. So you're making lengthier and bulkier document. Does it help you more? Again. By the way, this is no way reflection that our constitution will start from the good things about what's what has worked. We have survived as a republic. We are 76th year now, and we are a thriving democracy. If you look at the entire region along the way, there are great elements like fundamental rights and all that stuff. But again, let's not make any book so holy that we don't have an intellectual debate and intellectual discourse. In fact, if you look at it, the left piece of diagram or picture, you can see that there are the Indian Constitution has elements from different countries along the way. That means that when the Constitution was being framed, there were a lot of pieces that were being picked, or let's say that has already worked, because you had a model for over 200 years from United States, from Britain, from France. So pick what has worked along the way, again with the circumstances that the framers were dealing during that time, and wait along. But was it the right approach? Again, this is a question that I would leave you to think about. So what are the things that we need to think about? But before I say that, as I said, let's start. What are the good things, right? So the good things is that we gave universal voting rights, unlike many other countries. First thing, irrespective of caste, creed, class, man, woman, we made sure that everybody has a vote, which was remarkable for the time that we were in, right? Fundamental rights, again, equal, almost like parallel to Bill of Rights in United States. We gave fundamental rights along to us, but also with the power that it could be taken away by the state, which we will debate about. But the fact that we gave fundamental rights that are legally enforceable was an amazing achievement. Third, to protect the weaker sections of the society, right? Because of course, like because of the caste system and the untouchability practice, this huge amount of distressed population that was coming out, not only from colonialism but from segregation as well in our own language. So giving them equitable rights was a hallmark of the Constitution. And as till today, and we are trying the the whole idea of reservation and all is to make sure that that people who have been historically have suffered, to make sure that they are given sufficient resources and help from the state to uplift. So these are some of the good things of our Constitution, and we should all be proud of. However, there are some things that kinds of is what I call it as missed opportunities, and what Arghya talks about in the book. And what he says is that firstly, most of our Constitution is from the Government of India Act 1935. Just some context. Government of India Act was almost like a constitution framework, a governing framework that was drafted by the British Parliament, by the British, that how do they run the Indian government, by giving them provincial authority to elections and all that stuff. But this was not by Indians for Indians. It was for the British, to make sure that they can have more, they can give more autonomy, of course, after the second roundtable conference. This preceded the Government of India Act. This succeeded the Government of India Act 1919. So there was that frame. But the problem is that our Constitution has lifted most of the elements from Government of India Act. In fact, the first draft, it seems, is almost like 2/3 of Government of India Act of 1935. And the final draft was almost 1/3. So we were influenced heavily by the Government of India Act 1935. So the originality, because see, remember, India is a very different country, very, very different country. We needed our own thinking, our own original ideas. We shouldn't have followed the other elements. And that's where I gave that example of even artificial intelligence. We still follow somebody else's innovations and piggy hold on that. So this the originality, the innovation, the uniqueness, the thought leadership in building our Constitution, our own Constitution. Again, these are some remarkable people. We, from the finest, legal minds, patriots, freedom fighters who did that. But there were some things that we need to question. And the other thing is that as I said, it's not just from Government of India Act. There were bits and pieces from different countries as well. For example, as I said, Bill of Rights and Declaration of Human Rights from French influenced our fundamental rights. The Directive Principles of State Policy was influenced from the Irish Constitution. So there were different elements along the way that were taken, borrowed, and seen that. And there's the constitutional debate also. They talks about that we don't have, it needs to be done. It has worked, so just pick it up. And these were Western educated, great jurists, lawyers along the way, and so a missed opportunity on that. Second is that we didn't break from the colonial past, right? So we built a big nanny state, a strong center state. Instead of giving local autonomy, local village autonomy, local city, town level autonomy, where you could make decisions, which in fact was the Gandhian ideal, Gandhian model as well. We broke away from that. So we created a strong unitary system rather than a very federal uh, uh, um, constitution. So when I say along the way, where the states had as much of power, right? So we built a very unitary and intense center focused constitution. Uh, in fact, the another important trivia is we of course know Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, chairperson of the drafting committee, but there was the contribution of constitution was equally from a person by the name Sir Benegal Narsingh Rao, who was an Indian civil servant of and he drafted most of the aspects of India's constitution as well. So he along Dr. Ambedkar were two most important people, and probably one more person along the constitution making process. So here you have a civil servant who is working, again, he's a fine officer, great integrity, great morals, a great patriot, but remember, he's an ICS officer, worked for Indians, the British Indian government. And again, the draft that he has absorbed is from the British India Government of India Act 1935, and is looking at the Western models that has worked. And in fact, there's a trivia as well that the original name of India was supposed to be United States of India. That was a proposal. And but again, it was not United States of, there was no union of states per se, right? So it was like, it's a strong intense center, as I said. In fact, Kenegal Hanumantaya, which is like who was a great statesman, he said that who became the future chief minister of the erstwhile state of Mysore, he said the constitution resembled neither the music of Veena or sitar but the English band. So that kind of sums up well. So things to ponder about that, right? So we adopted most of this from Government of India Act 1935. So, and why was that? So Arya talks about some very interesting aspect. He infers it that there was a trust deficit, like that. I mean, remember, the constitution was being framed on. It was a difficult period for India. One, India was being partitioned. Number two, the Muslim League had boycotted it, so the credibility, if I can say that, even though the cabinet mission had went ahead, they did not accede to Jinnah's demand. They said that go ahead, and the Constituent Assembly was formed, the election, but there was a gap. And most importantly, during the course of the Constitution, especially in 1947, there were partition, there were horrible riots. So this was in fact, there was a gloomy atmosphere when the first day of the Constituent Assembly, when people met during the first day of the Constitution, because of the riots that was going on. Gandhiji was obviously was disturbed, and I think was on a fast also, and all that stuff. So there was this. So the idea was that you create something strong from a center perspective, a unitary perspective, you take good lofty ideals, but at the same time, like, keep a check. In fact, there's a statement by somebody saying that, like, that this constitution, Arge has a chapter on that, which just says that most of this looks like it's been made for the police constable, because you make it like a nanny state, a strong state, which can take control of everything out. Like, you give, but you can take it back whenever you want, right? And the other thing was that this is there was the belief, like, it was like, this is the paradox, I call it, right? That you don't trust that people can do it, but at the same time, you have this lofty thing that, if I make laws, uh, the future legislators will have only noble intentions. When the US Constitution was being framed, it was the reverse, that you have checks and balances in such a way that you cannot abuse the system. No matter how strong the president is, there are different systems which can have checks and balances. But here, we took the reverse. So there is a paradox along the way. That means the trust is that you don't trust at the local people. For example, the local municipality, the local town, the local village, the local people, they can, for example, a state like Karnataka or Tamil Nadu should decide whether they should have state tax or not. They can collect revenue the way they want. They have their own laws along the way, obviously in a broad framework, but they run like autonomous units within the larger framework. Instead of that, this is a inverted pyramid where the top down approach is there. Like, whether, okay, you get a share from GST and all that stuff, but the local autonomy is not there. So, and take the example of the what I call as, and what not I call, Argue also calls, the deep state in India is the Indian bureaucracy. So you remove the colonial system and put Indian people out there and think that the system would function well because Indians have noble intentions. So you remove ICS and make it IAS, and you think that they will serve people of India, but they still serve the government. IAS, if you can see, if people who have suffered, again, not a general statement along the way, but the bureaucracy, the bureaucratic, the red tapeism that we call it along the way, is because they are not there to serve people. I mean, there are good officers, of course, there are people who are there out there, but the system is so designed that they are made to serve this thing, because we have inherited a colonial system where the ICS officers were meant to serve the British government, not the Indian. Third thing is that these were all lawyers, like, Dr. Ambedkar, B.N. Rao, and Munshi, and the people from Constitution, they were all lawyers, and the well-read lawyers. They have seen constitutional documents that have worked along the way. So less time, again. So pick what's worked. And that was probably one of the statement also made in the debates, that, what's working, take it, and no apologies for that. The third thing is that, like, it was ironical that many of them were freedom fighters. So you expected them to get rid of laws which for that they have suffered. For example, sedition law. Most of them were set behind bar for sedition law. The first thing you would do is take out that law. But till today, we have kept that law. Yes, sedition is, like, I mean, it is, it's important from a, betraying a country and all that stuff is absolutely necessary. But the way it is used, we all know how it is abused. So it's obnoxious, and it baffles that things along the way. In fact, talks about, like, even keeping the salt tax now in a different format. They said that the parliament can legislate along the way. But Gandhi ji and the Dandi March was completely, led for removing things like salt tax allowance, and leaving that to the states would have been the ideal structure. And localization of the government, right? Sri Aurobindo and Radha Kumud Mukherjee had created these models that, that giving autonomy at the local level is very important along. But we made a strong unitary state. a Delhi-centric, Delhi-controlled state. And this is again comes from the European model, the British model. So Arghya has this quote from Macaulay. We all, there's a loose connotation that we call Macaulay Putras, especially when it comes to education. And the quote is as follows. He said in 1833 that it may be having become instructed in European knowledge, they Indians may in some future age demand European institutions whenever it comes, it will be the proudest day of English history to have found a great people sunk in the lowest depth of the slavery and superstition, to have so ruled as to have made the desirous and capable of all the privileges of citizens would indeed be a title to glory of all of our own. So probably on 26th November 1949, when Constitution was completed, Macaulay would be the happiest man that we proved him right. Next is the whole debate about fundamental rights and directive principles. If you've forgotten civics, you know that part 3 of our constitution in India is fundamental rights, and part 4 is directive principles of state policy. Difference being fundamental rights are legally enforceable if a great set of rights along the way, modeled on, as I said, Bill of Rights along. But something very unusual, that the constitution makers put a provision that these rights can be taken away under certain extraordinary circumstances, in emergency circumstances, even for when it's not just external aggression but even internal disturbances. And you saw the consequence in 1975 when they were suspended as well. So why would you do that? Because even in Britain, and Arghya argues about it, that in the height of the Second World War, the right to constitutional remedy was not removed along the way. So you did not copy where you needed to copy from the Western world. Somewhere there is this trust deficit. So you give this fundamental rights, but allow them to take it back. By the way, right to property was there. It was removed again because of the Zamindari system and all that stuff. That's a different debate. And now we have right to education, as well. So it is this contradiction along. Then you have directive principles of state policy. Now, though, if you remember, this is part 4 of the Constitution. These are like lofty ideals or directives, but which are not legally enforceable. So in constitutional debates, there were some very good ideas. This is a partial list, but it looks more socialist in character. That's another thing that you wanted to have state control. In fact, there was even a talk about making everyone should buy life insurance, which didn't pass through, thankfully, along the way. So mandate to buy life insurance and all. So there is this directive principles policy, lofty goals by the government, but not legally enforceable. So there's a debate. There are some very good ideas out there, and people tried to make it as part of fundamental rights, but they were not. So again, why something it baffles as well. Some very good ideas were there, not all of them here, but in the discussions, in the debates, that what the government should do, those should be made legally enforceable. So putting these lofty ideas and not these things, why do you put this constitution? So that's why this constitution is such a lengthy, bulky document. If one whole section is not legally enforceable, why do you do that? Anyways, I'm not a constitutional expert, but something to think about. Next, so this whole idea versus states and federal, right? So again, as I said, you give the right to the government. Remember, India had the British India, the princely states, a huge conglomeration, and the cultural, the linguistic diversity along the way. Again, you give so much power to the center that you can dismiss the state governments along the way. Now, in today's context, we are so politically polarized. We say that, okay, opposition, just go and dismiss that government. But should you do that? The federal government in Delhi, should you have been given? Now, don't look at it from the present context, but go back 50 years back along the way. How many times, like, the governments have been dismissed for frivolous reasons. So, and this whole idea that, our villages needed to be empowered. This is something where, like, Dr. Ambedkar had a very strong view that the government, it should have a strong central government along the way, rather than at the local level. And there are two reasons for that, and based on what I could read and infer from this. One is Dr. Ambedkar led a remarkable life, against the worst kind of discrimination that a person could face, in spite of all the odds, like, from, literally called quote unquote untouchable, from the untouchable community. He built his own career and, became, went obviously with, went to Columbia, and in UK, and became one of the greatest scholars. Was invited by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, to be part of this committee as well. In fact, he was not elected, so a seat was given to him in the Constituent Assembly so that he can be part and be chairperson of the drafting committee. Finest mind along, right? So he probably also had a view that giving autonomy to the villages was again creating the situation what he had faced, which is the villages are divided by caste, by discrimination along the way. So if you give that local authority, the people from the downtrodden, the depressed class will suffer even more. And so instead of that, you make a strong civil service driven center who are quote unquote liberal in their outlook, and they can enforce laws. But do you think that that has happened? Maybe yes, into a certain extent, but I think there was this distrust, this along the way, rightfully so. Again, you can question or along the way, but there was, again, this is not a commentary on it, but this whole idea that giving local autonomy, right? Now think about it, what we have suffered because of that. Today, most of our cities are failing in India, from basic facilities, from water to clean air to, yeah, certain basic elements along the way. How many of these cities, or let me ask a reverse question. How many people in these large cities, let's say Bangalore or these things, do they even know their mayor? Maybe some people, but how much is the mayor empowered to make serious decisions, or what quote unquote executive decisions along the way? Or let's say, for example, Tamil Nadu tomorrow decides to abolish state income tax. Do they have the right to do it? So if you look at the current success models, right, the international cities or international states, whether it is Singapore, Dubai, they run like a city-state government, like within themselves. The local empowerment has to be there. The diktats cannot come from the top. People at the ground level understand what they need for their society, for their community. But we vested so much power with the center that it's reverse. So the states have to go with like a begging bowl. Of course, you have GST and all that stuff that you can argue till the cows come home. But the fact of the matter is the autonomy isn't there. The ground up autonomy. This is where Gandhi's model, in fact, there was so Arghya talks about a small princely state outside Pune. It's not, those of you who are from Pune know this, Aundh. Aundh was a small princely state in itself. And Aound, the ruler of Aound, and I think the minister there, I forget his name, they produced a fine constitution on Gandhian ideals. In fact, Gandhi was a coach himself for that, and that was considered to be great. But of course, it was for 75,000 people. It was a grassroots-driven democracy that, you kind of elect from local level to the next, to the next, to the next, and that person becomes the head of the state. So an ideal model, but of course, Gandhi even knew that this cannot run for a complex, large country like India. But there were some models also that was available. In fact, Hindu Mahasabha, and this was a surprising revelation in this book, that Hindu Mahasabha also designed a constitutional framework, which was secular. In fact, Savarkar later on, when he says, along the way, they said that there's a freedom of practice of religion. So Hindutva was not considered that only Hindus. He wanted a constitution only for Hindus along the way. Again, it was a non-starter, but good ideas were there. For example, right to recall, referendum. Like right to recall, especially, you can debate about referendum because suddenly, our eyes pop up whether it should be referendum or not. But forget Kashmir. But in some cases, don't you want to do a referendum and ask the will of the people? For example, in states here in United States, with their elections, some important topics go for a vote. Whether there should be a certain proposition that should be made as a state law or not. So citizens have the right to vote, and that's only applicable for that state. Similarly, if you have signatures of more than X number of people, you have the right to recall. You have to wait for the 5-year cycle to make sure that you can outvote that person, provided we can overcome the temptations and all that stuff, because again, we know how elections are also fought with a lot of muscle and money power as well. So these are questions that we need to have, that should have also been considered along the way. So here also there have been picks from different elements from the constitution from different countries along. But the idea is well summed up, that by Arghya in this last page, is that the constitution creates a towering state. The Constitution of India, he means, creates a towering state that stifles individual state. And he, as I said, it gives the police constable examples, like so somebody in the Constitutional Assembly said that this is some of the stuff, especially related to sedition law and all that stuff, framed as if for a police constable. It creates bog governments that diminish the role of local communities. It creates big governments, that diminish the role of the local communities. It gives citizens fundamental rights, but hedges them with a slew of restrictions. I think that sums up well. So very fine book. So that's why it's called Colonial Constitution, and you want to think about it, that how much of our constitution, and again, whenever we say that you want to redo our constitution, the hell breaks loose in the political discourse. That's not something for me to comment, but something for us to kind of read through what the constitution, what goes behind making these constitutions. And India's constitution debates is fascinating. A lot of, it's available on public document. It's publicly available on the internet. So those of you are interested to do that. But again, once again, I recommend this great book by Arghya, Colonial Constitution. And those of you who want to read further reading as well, there are many other books as well. With that, there's been a long talk on this subject. Once again, a very happy Republic Day. Thank you very much.